Good morning, good afternoon, Alison McGinley here. Welcome to day 3 of identifying emotional abuse. Let me just make sure that I've closed down. Yeah, I've closed down all the other open apps that can beep and blip and put me off, so that you have my full undivided attention. So today, well, first of all, welcome. We've got a lot of new people in the group over the last few days, which is great. Keep the engagement up, keep asking questions, keep supporting each other, and of course, if you have any questions, reach out, ask me. If you put the question in the group, very often somebody with who's been through it will jump in and give you, hi Lee, give you the answer that you're looking for. So today is, as I say, day 3, and today we're looking at passive aggressive behaviour. Now, it is a form of emotional abuse, and it's a form of emotional abuse that I used for most of my life. I used it as a way of communicating. I used it as a way of expressing myself, and I'll go into the details as to why I did that down, later in the live stream. But it's a learned behaviour. It's something that I was taught to do because it's what I saw happening around about me. It's how the women in my family communicated their anger, their resentment, their mistrust, their frustration. There was such a huge fear of actually saying what the problem was in case it was rejected, that this emotionally abusive, passive aggressive, eye rolling and under your breath muttering was the way that I was taught how to communicate. So I really wanted to spend the whole of today, the whole of this session, looking at that, because it's, and I saw that Lee jumped on actually, it is one of the biggest communication problems that we have in our relationships. It is the number one factor that leads you down to the divorce court, because it's, if somebody is consistently behaving in a certain manner and then denying that they're behaving that way and denying that there's a problem, it's very difficult to have a relationship with that person, certainly not a meaningful, deep and connected relationship. And and if you never get beyond that and you never get by that, the relationship really has nowhere to grow. It has nowhere to grow, and to go. And and either you end up in a very, very unhappy place, or you end up heading towards divorce. And my family, my parents' relationship was very, very unhappy. Part of the problem was this passive aggressiveness. My own marriage, luckily my husband had a huge amount more self-worth than I did, so he didn't buy into my passive aggressiveness. He batted it off. But what happens if you're on the receiving side of it is it really erodes at your self-doubt, at your self-worth. It creates self-doubt. It creates, it plays mind games with you. If somebody's body language is telling you one thing and they're verbally expressing something different, it's very difficult to tally the two up. And if you find yourself, what often happens is we find ourselves attracted to the same type of personality in our romantic relationships, our friendships, etc., and even in our working environments that we're used to. So quite often, if we have one passive-aggressive relationship going, we have a few, and it begins to create a belief in our minds that we're not good enough, that we're not, that what we think here isn't reality, and it really erodes our own self-worth, our self-esteem. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So what is passive aggressiveness? Well, really, and why would we use it? Well, what it is, in effect, is it's a way of controlling our environment, controlling the people within our environment, giving us, when everything else feels that it's out of control, it gives us that sense of at least I can do something here. But it's a false sense of control, because actually you're creating a disconnection, and eventually people will move away from you. They may not move away from you physically. There are so many couples that have gone 50, 60 years together, and they're still hanging in there. But what it does do is it pushes people away from you emotionally. So, you know, you can be living in a relationship, but you're living two separate lives and you're not coming together. Frankly, what's the point? What is the point of that? So I just want to run through a few ways. This is a really bad time to come on and do a live stream, because all down the side of my my computer, I'm getting emails and pop-ups and whatever. Obviously at 6 minutes past 3, that's when everybody wants to send out their emails. So what is passive aggressiveness? Well, it's that way of behaving. It's that way of showing your displeasure, your anger, your hurt, whatever it happens to be, without actually stating it, and doing it in such a way that if you're called out on it, if somebody pulls you up on it, you're able to deny it. You find a way to say, no, that's not how it is, and you dig your heels in, and it leaves, you know, it leaves that horrible feeling in the air. You don't feel good about it. And I'm talking as as someone who's practiced it. You don't feel good about it, and you don't know how to overcome it. You know, you back yourself into a corner when you're behaving in this way. You back yourself into a corner, and you're almost, you know, pleading with the other person to help you get out of it. If they don't know, you know, if we're all, you know, we're grown-ups, and if you're telling somebody you're fine, and if they're believing you that you're fine, they'll go off and they'll let you stew in it, and it causes a disconnection. Why does it happen? It happens mostly because we are, and this is where I go back into, you know, where I start and end everything, because we don't have a good relationship with ourselves. We haven't built that deep knowing relationship with ourselves. We don't love ourselves. Why don't we love ourselves? Because we're not accepting ourselves. Why are we not accepting ourselves? Because we've never done that journey, you know, made that journey inwards to get to know ourselves. Why? Because we're suffering low self-esteem, low self-worth, and we're terrified that if we look inwards, what we think we know up here will be 10 times worse inside. Paradoxically, what you find inside is 100 times better than you can ever think up here. Because, you know, the ego runs the mind. We're running, you know, our thoughts are running our mind, and, you know, our thoughts are telling us, I'm useless, I'm worthless, I'm whatever else. However, we're not. We're doing the best we can with what we have available to us at any time. So, you know, I can sit here today and I can tell you categorically, I wasn't a nice person to be in a relationship with, as a daughter, as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, whilst I was unaware of this passive aggressive behaviour, because I didn't know any better. I didn't know that I could behave in any different way. I didn't know that if I spoke out and said, I'm unhappy and I'm not, you know, and I'm not prepared to entertain this type of interaction anymore, that I wouldn't be rejected, I wouldn't be pushed to one side, and I wouldn't, more especially, I wouldn't be told, well, you shouldn't feel like that, which again would undermine my feelings. Why? Because that's how I was brought up. That was the pattern of behaviour that I saw between my parents, but also felt on my own skin. That's how unfortunately, I can look at it today with a completely different set of eyes. That's how my mother behaved. She didn't behave like that because she was bad. She didn't behave like that because she wanted to punish me. She did behave like that because she wanted to control me, but not, you know, not for the reasons that I felt as I was growing up. Not because I wasn't good enough, not because I had to be changed, not because there was something inherently wrong with me, but because there was something inherently missing in her relationship with herself. She didn't have any self-esteem. Therefore, she couldn't put herself into a situation where she may have to admit she was wrong. It was too painful and it was too difficult. So her way of behaving was to squash the people who would call her out down. She would use all sorts of ploys. She would use gaslighting. Gaslighting, what is that? You know, we hear about it in terms of huge narcissistic personalities, but we all use it to one extent or another in our, not in our everyday relationships, but often in our relationships. when we're feeling uncomfortable, when we're feeling under pressure, when we're feeling that somebody is pointing a finger at us, we quite often go into that gaslighting trait. What is it? It's denying that either what we said, what we did, or what we intended was actually occurred, or occurred in the way that the other person read it. The intention is to save my skin and to make you believe me and question yourself. So denial of a situation or of an intention. And it's very, excuse me, my lipstick's annoying me. It's very difficult to argue back against that. And what happens on the other side is you start to question your own thinking. But am I too sensitive? Doesn't it help that, a lot of us are very highly sensitive, and we have this tendency, we've been brought up being told, oh, you're too sensitive. So you think, okay, maybe it's true, maybe I am too sensitive, maybe I shouldn't be feeling this. Let me say at this point, whatever you're feeling is valid. And that is the next point that I want to touch on in this passive aggressiveness. Somebody puts you in a position that you feel a certain way, and then they deny your feelings. They undermine your feelings. They say, you shouldn't feel like that. I didn't mean it like that. And they take offense that you would be upset. So they throw everything back on you. So first of all, you're hurt because you've been offended or you've been insulted or whatever's happened. And then when you express that hurt or anger or resentment or whatever has come up for you, you end up feeling guilty for expressing it because the other person pushes your emotions down, pushes the way you're feeling down, and leaves you thinking, whichever way I turn, I'm bad. Whichever way I turn, I'm flawed. What do I do? And as I say, it often happens that if you've got one relationship that's running along these lines, you'll have many others. So you're surrounded by it. And as Jim Rohn says, we are the sum of the 5 closest people to us. So if the people in your circle are displaying passive aggressive behaviours, you're going to take them on your own skin. You're going to take them on, you're going to feel them, and you're going to react to them. And it's going to push down your own sense of self-worth. And the more it's pushed down, the more you attract that in. And the more likely you are to resort to it as a coping mechanism, as a communication mechanism. So other ways that we would see this passive aggressiveness, sulking. I mentioned yesterday, I was a huge sulker. I didn't have the words and I didn't have the courage to speak my truth. So I sulked. I sulked for so long at certain points that I couldn't remember what the start was. But it's really unpleasant to be around. It's really difficult to have a relationship with somebody who's sulking. And I have been known, last week when I was putting together the blog post and some other bits and pieces for this week, I found myself falling back into character. I was reading things and then I could feel it again. I could feel myself falling back into that. I was sulking at my husband because he happened to talk at me. And of course, he had things that he needed to say. I couldn't say, can you leave me in peace because I'm working? So I started to fall back into character. I started sulking and rolling my eyes at him when he would talk in the hope that would put him off. So do you find yourself doing that? Do you sulk? Are you a sulker? What about, something else that for me was incredibly difficult, for the people that I speak to is incredibly difficult, is being in somebody's company when you are offended by them. You can't actually express yourself. You don't have the words. You don't have the emotional wherewithal to express yourself. There's fear involved that you will be told, nah, you shouldn't feel like that. And then the spiral that comes with that, or that's not how it's meant. And then you think, oh, I'm so sensitive. So you end up not confronting. And then what happens? You start to withdraw from people. You start to hide from people. And this, again, occurs very often when you have the people-pleasing, personality type, which I hold my hands up to. I think in one of my blogs I said, I was a passive-aggressive people pleaser, and they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. People pleasing is the inability to set boundaries and the ability to give too much without being able to receive in return, but at the same time creating stories about how much you're giving and how little you're receiving, which then, that by very nature, if you're people pleasing, it's because you are inherently lacking in some sort of self-worth or self-belief, and you're trying to create your self-belief by giving and giving and giving. And then, of course, you're unable to receive because you don't know how to set boundaries. So you're terrified that people will overstep the mark and push you down, and you'll be forced into making decisions that you don't want to make or taking actions that you don't particularly feel comfortable with. So you give, but you won't receive. And then you begin to feel that the world's a heavy place, that people only take from you, they never give, and you start to withdraw. And that's where the passive aggressiveness comes in. You're withdrawing, you're hoping that they understand the reason that you're withdrawing and the reason that you're unavailable. You're not answering the phone when they call. You're taking longer than normal to respond to text messages. You leave emails sitting in your inbox for days at a time, or maybe you just never get around to answering them. And it's all back to this fear. It's all back to the fear that goes with being a people pleaser. Another big one for us passive aggressives, or recovering passive aggressive. I'm definitely a recovering passive aggressive because I couldn't do anything about my behaviour whilst I was unaware of it. Whilst I didn't have any other tools in my toolbox, I didn't have any option but to pick passive aggressiveness up in its various forms and use that when I felt confronted, when I felt threatened, when I had to make myself, had to have communication about certain situations. When I learned what it was, and I learned that it was actually a really, really dangerous pattern of communication, and it was ruining all my relationships, nearly ruined my marriage. It was the number one culprit in the disconnect with my husband. But I lost so many friendships over the years because I didn't, my only way of communicating was sulking, was ignoring, was denying. And I couldn't do any differently. Now I know differently. Now I've got a different set of tools. I know that the responsibility is with me to build a good, strong sense of self-worth, a good, strong relationship with myself, and to understand exactly what it is that I want to communicate with people. And also not need other people's validation. So when I'm communicating, I'm not communicating anymore from a place of, I need you to do this for me to make me feel better or to understand me so that I feel justified in the way I'm feeling. I now am able to communicate from a place of, I'm telling you this because this is how it is, and you have a decision to make. You either agree to behave in a suitable manner, or you don't, and then you can leave. So it's not a case, and it's not even putting an ultimatum out there. It's teaching people, what's right, what's wrong, and what's acceptable in my field. But until I knew what my behaviour pattern was, two, what it was costing me, not just in terms of losing relationships or ruining relationships or creating really difficult drama-based relationships, but also internally what it made me feel about myself. It's really, if you are using this passive-aggressive behaviour, if you recognise it, recognise anything I'm talking about, you'll know that feeling of, it's not even disgust, but dis-ease within yourself. You know what you're doing is unpleasant. You know that it's not the right way to go about. You know that continuing down this path is going to have the same result as it did last time and the time before, but you just have that inability to to change it. So it feels really uncomfortable. It feels really, sicky in the pit of your stomach, but you're unable to shift. You're unable to shift out of it. I stopped breathing and I forgot what I was going to say. No, I was actually, what I was doing was just scrolling down to see if anyone had dropped any comments in, but I can't see. Can't see if you have. I'm sorry if you have. If you are, then I'll answer them later. So yeah, punishing people. That's where I was, punishing people, and mostly they don't even know you're punishing them, and that's that is the contradiction in terms. Here you are. You're incapable of speaking your truth. You're incapable of sharing openly and honestly what's going on. So you fall into this passive aggressiveness, this this denying that anything is amiss, and it's all done with the purpose of hurting the other person. Now, the other person, if they were like my husband, for instance, will be pissed off. Here she goes again. They'll roll their eyes and they'll go on living their life. So you're not punishing them, you're punishing yourself, and you're keeping yourself separate. You're putting yourself in this gilded cage where you can see the world, you can reach through and you can touch it, but you're not part of it. So the idea behind it is to punish, but the only person that you're punishing is yourself. It's like drinking the poison. What's that expression? Drinking the poison and hoping the other person will die. That's exactly what what this behaviour brings out in us. I'm going to take a breath now. There are so many different ways of identifying this passive aggressiveness, and you'll be able to. I would ask you when you watch this to just sit back and think about your own behaviour and identify where it could be passive aggressive, where it could be causing pain on the other side, emotional pain on the other side. On the other, going back to the other side of it, are you on the receiving end? Are you living with someone, or are you in a relationship, friendship, peer, work colleague, or whatever relationship, where you've identified some of these patterns? Is there somebody in your life who sulks? I am really lucky, actually. When I think about it, I'm very lucky. Nobody sulks around me anymore. I was the sulker, and not even my kids. But how does it feel? How does it feel when you're on the receiving end of it? Do you get that feeling? Do you have that thing where you're confronted by somebody quite clearly? You feel the energy, and that's the biggest thing. Often I talk about this when we communicate. We're not communicating just with words, we're communicating with the energy, with an energy that comes behind it. And if the energy is to quash somebody, or to squash them, or to make them feel less than, or to make them understand that we're unhappy, they read that. Of course they read that, but it's so confusing. It's so confusing when my words are telling you one thing. There's nothing wrong. No, there's nothing wrong. I'm absolutely fine. I don't know what you're talking about. There you go again. You're always thinking there's something wrong, and there's nothing wrong. In the meantime, I'm banging pans and cursing under my breath, and I'm rolling my eyes every time you look at me, and I'm maybe taking it out. And this is another area that I see happening a lot in my circle of friends. Instead of addressing the person who's upsetting you, you make them, you show them you're upset by addressing it somewhere else. You focus that anger somewhere else. So you suddenly become very shouty at the kids, or the email that you got through in your inbox that just shouldn't have arrived. You start getting irritated at that. So you find an outlet that's not directly the person that's upsetting you. They know. They know you're upset. You hope they understand that they triggered the rest of the behaviour. But in effect, you're not addressing them directly. Let me take a sip of coffee. So these are some of the ways that I have used to express my sense of dissatisfaction, my frustration, my hurt, my upset, my anger, my resentment, when I was in a place that I was too fearful to actually speak my truth. If you recognise it, great, fantastic, because until you get to the point that you can recognise the behaviour, you can't hope to change it. Now, somebody asked in yesterday's feed, and I'm going to talk about this on Sunday when I do a longer question and answer session. If you have any questions, do ask them, do pop them down. But somebody asked, should I, if I am on the receiving end of some passive aggressive behaviour and I've identified it as such, what should I do? Should I call them out on it? And the answer is, it depends on your reason why. And it also depends on how aware they are of their behaviour. I wouldn't, as a first step, call them out, because that's going to create more disconnection. It's going to push, the other person is going to put them even further on defensive, and that's not a good place to be. I would start very, very gently by describing what you feel and what that actually is, rather than jumping in and saying that's passive aggressive, that's gaslighting, that's this, that's the other, and moving and putting it back on them, because they will retaliate or they'll withdraw further. So I would take the time to really make sure that you're communicating from a place of letting them understand what the behaviour brings out in other people. Because unless they're aware, they can't change it. And they're going to be more willing to become aware and to take it on if they don't feel under pressure, they don't feel threatened, they don't feel that you're pointing the finger and you're blaming them for the behaviour. So, but I'll talk about that a bit more in detail on Sunday's live stream. For today, as I say, I can't scroll down, so I've no idea if anybody did, and I'm so sorry if you did ask any questions, but I will, I promise, respond in kind once I finish up here. So yeah, passive aggressiveness, it's the killer. It ruins relationships, it ruins marriages, it ruined many of mine, and I didn't know any better. Now I do, and now I want you to be able to identify, either if you're in the same camp as me, you've been in the same camp as me, or if you're on the receiving end of it. And if you're on the receiving end of it, don't worry, don't feel threatened by it. It's emotional, it's emotional fear on the other part. It's an emotional, Karen Bosveld used a beautiful expression. It's emotional, immaturity. That's not what she said. But basically, it's a lack of emotional maturity, a lack of emotional intelligence on the other side. And it isn't malicious, or it isn't coming from a malicious point of view. It feels like it when it's on your skin, it feels like it, and especially when somebody's denying it. But the intention behind it is to save themselves, to protect themselves, not to punish you and not to hurt you, even when that's how it feels. So today is Wednesday. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at some tools to help you identify ways of managing it if you're on the receiving end. But in the meantime, I am going to, once again, I've hit 30 minutes, fantastic. So I'm going to close up now. I'll answer your questions later in the group. Have a fabulous day. And you will see that I popped into the group a blog post that I wrote this week around passive aggressiveness, and it goes into a bit more detail on my own personal experience as the passive aggressive people pleaser, how I managed to change that and how it showed up in my relationships. I'll hopefully that will be of use to you as well. So with that in mind, I'll love you and leave you. Have a great day, and I'll see you here again tomorrow.